Welcome. My name is Lydia Makaroff, and I'm the Chief Executive of Fight Bladder Cancer here in the UK, as well as the Vice President of the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition. I'm so excited to welcome you all to our annual meeting. Today we have live speakers direct from the UK, Belgium, the USA, and Canada. As you can see, we are bringing bladder cancer on the global health policy agenda together. We have over 100 people registered, and I can see that we have already over 40 people joining us live. We are very excited to welcome you to this annual meeting. We have a lot of live options so we can interact with you directly. The first question that we have for you is, what country are you coming from? So here we have a live poll. The link is also in the chat. So we would love to hear from you. Where are you coming from? You can either type in the URL at the top. So you can type in pollev.com/WBCPC, or you can click on the chat and you can enter your response. We ask if you can enter yours by clicking, thank you, click on the chat and then click on the link in the chat, and then you can enter your response. Fantastic. So I see here that we have got responses from Belgium, UK, Switzerland. Click on the link and then you can add it to the word cloud as well. So fantastic to see so many people here from around the world. I see people from Australia as well, the UK, Canada, New Jersey. Thank you. It's really fantastic to see representatives from all around the world. We're also going to continue this discussion on Twitter as well. So if you have any comments that you would like to leave during this webinar or afterwards, you can chat to us using the hashtag WBCPC2020 or hashtag Bladder Cancer Aware, so we can continue this discussion after the webinar. We also have an option for questions and answers. So you will see down below, you'll see an option that says Q&A. And if you have any questions for any of the speakers at any time, you can leave a question there. You can also see what other people are asking, and you can click on the thumbs up icon if you would like to like a question asked by someone else, and you can also answer questions asked by others. So this will be a 1.5-hour event with 2 panels, and we'll also have a 5-minute break in between. So this is our agenda. So we'll first have an introduction by our president to introduce the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition and our mission. And then we'll have session 1, which will be on how do we foster bladder cancer patient groups around the world. We'll have a quick break. And then session 2 will be on ensuring optimal treatment options for bladder cancer worldwide. So I'm now honored to introduce Ken Bagshaw. Ken is a bladder cancer survivor, past chair of Bladder Cancer Canada, and the founding and current president of the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition. I'm so proud to work with him, and now I pass the floor to Ken for his opening statements. Ken, you just need to unmute yourself. Just unmute, Ken, and then we should be able to hear you. Perfect. Thank you, Ken.
A warm welcome to everyone from around the globe attending our 2nd annual meeting on bladder cancer. We regret the limitations imposed by the coronavirus, as we would have loved to welcome you all in person, but we appreciate the global reach that communication technology allows us. A global coalition, such was a dream in 2016, envisioned in Toronto, Canada, Washington, DC, and Chenor in England. And thereupon commenced an exciting dialogue among me, Andrea Maddox-Smith, from the Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network in the US, and the late Andrew Winterbottom, the founder of Fight Bladder Cancer Charity in the United Kingdom. It was further energized by the fortunate and timely decision by one of our pharma industry partners to organize 2 international bladder cancer workshops in 2017, which we all attended and promoted the idea among the attendees. We got enthusiastic support. A further opportunity to gather support arose at the June 2018 Congress of the European Cancer Patient Coalition, where we further promoted the vision. At this time, there were at least 6 national bladder cancer organizations with a common vision, ready and anxious to address the worldwide need displayed on this slide. Bladder cancer being the 10th most common in the world, bladder cancer being the 13th leading cancer-related cause of death. Even more seriously and dramatically, in North America and Europe, it is 4th or 5th most common cancer. Over the fall of 2018, we gathered the needed resources, set up a provisional board, and hired a secretariat. In December, we held our organizing board meeting, leading to the grant of our incorporation by royal decree in Belgium in January 2019, with 3 members, 1 for each of the UK, Canada, and the United States. It had been a challenging journey, but the launch of the entity was a thrilling moment and opened the world to us. Since then, we've increased our membership from 3 to 11 now. Thus, in the spring of 2019, a second member from the UK, 2 members from Australia, and 1 from each of France, Italy, and Norway joined us. A second Norwegian member and an organization from South Africa came on board this year, bringing our complement of members up to 11, representing 8 countries and 4 continents. A great beginning, but still a long way to go. If we can't find more existing organizations, we must facilitate their creation. Hence, the topic for our first panel discussion today. Our mission is driven by the virtually total absence of support and guidance for a very high percentage of bladder cancer sufferers throughout the world. To address this, our mission is to foster an international community of people affected by bladder cancer, to advocate for access to the best possible cancer information, support, and care, and to build alliances with health professionals, policymakers, academics, researchers, and industry. Our huge challenge in building the international community is finding the people, likely patients, who have the vision and energy to build an organization in their country. And then it's for us to help them achieve that goal. Our first panel today will discuss ways in which we might find those people and new organizations may be fostered. We look forward to hearing innovative and inspirational ideas to help our task, which is the ongoing fulfillment of our first mission goal. This activity will be assisted by our achievements in our second and third mission goals, our role in advocacy, and our role in building alliances. Our second panel today will address these aspects of our mission. In our short existence, we've offered networking and capacity building opportunities to our existing and potential members, principally through our annual meetings, physically in Barcelona, Spain last year, and virtually together with all of you here today. We have become a strong voice in broadcasting the bladder cancer story in Bladder Cancer Awareness Month, held annually in May. This May, because of the coronavirus, life was different. But the Awareness Month was as important as ever, if not more so. And through that month, we have provided resources to raise awareness to our members and partners around the world and shared the messages of support that were generated. We've built up our social media presence and have an ever-growing community of engaged followers. And we've continued to build strategic partners which are essential for us to deliver on our mission. These include our connection to the pharma industry for support that allows us to develop and pursue our projects, our key international bladder cancer and urology organizations that have embraced us. And in that regard, we work closely with AllCan International, European Association of Urology, International Society of Urology, European Cancer Organization, We Can Network, the European Cancer Patient Coalition, and the European Association of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, represented here today on our first panel by Zofia Bakonye. We have joined an informal alliance of 8 global cancer patient organizations, among which is the International Kidney Cancer Coalition, represented here today on our first panel by Dr. Rachel Giles, who also was with us at our first annual meeting last year. This year, we've also launched a new identity. You see it on the screen. This is the logo that symbolizes our global mission. Our brand new, robust website will be launching in the coming weeks, and we hope it will become a global resource for anyone affected by bladder cancer: patients, caregivers, patient advocates, physicians, and any friends and colleagues who may wish to support our mission. We have hired a youthful, energetic, and accomplished executive director, Alex Felicivas. His recruitment was a key milestone in the growth of our young and dynamic organization, and I am confident that Alex will lead this organization into the future to ensure that bladder cancer is on the global health agenda. Now, in the near term, we need to focus ourselves on, firstly, the rollout of our recently launched startup guide for bladder cancer patient groups, which is available in English and soon to be available in French and Spanish. We will be adding more languages and localized editions in the coming year. We need to complete our strategic plan for the next several years. We need to maintain and enhance our core activities. We need to build new partnerships and alliances globally. I'm excited to hear today's panel discussions and expect that the ideas which will be generated will energize and focus our imminent capacity building and advocacy efforts. I also hope that our audiences today from different corners of the world will share their experiences with us today. We are here to listen and facilitate the exchange. So I encourage you to join the discussions in the Q&A sessions today. You may also reach out to us later via email. We're always looking to partner and connect with like-minded people and organizations. Whether you're looking to become a member, start a patient group in your country, or donate your time and experience to support our work, there are a number of different ways you can get involved. Thank you all so very much for listening. I now turn the mic over to my colleague, Lydia Makarov.
Thank you so much, Ken. And now it's time for our first panel discussion. So I would like to introduce our 4 amazing speakers. We have Ferg Devens from Canada, who's the current chair of Bladder Cancer Canada. We have Dr. Ashish Kamat from the USA, who works at MD Anderson Cancer Center, as well as the Société Internationale d'Urologie. We have Dr. Rachel Giles from the Netherlands, who's the chair of the International Kidney Cancer Coalition, and Zofia Bakonye from Belgium, who's the senior manager for partnerships at the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. So first I pass the floor to Ferg to speak about his experience with Bladder Cancer Canada.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Lydia, for that warm welcome. The sun is rising here in Toronto, Canada, and it's great to be joining everyone from around the world. And special greetings to those over in Australia. I think the sun is setting. So I'm a non-muscle invasive bladder cancer survivor. I had 2 tumors removed back in 2014, and then underwent to BCG for 18 months. And so glad to say that on my annual checkups now, I'm all clear. Bladder Cancer Canada was founded by 2 bladder cancer patients 11 years ago, Jack Moon and David Gutman. And thanks to their passion and what they saw was a need, the need was that there wasn't anyone out there to advocate and support bladder cancer patients. And I think that's probably something that's common around the world. So Jack and David worked hard to create Bladder Cancer Canada. Always love to hear David's story about calling the Canadian Cancer Society for support. And a few days later, a woman with kidney cancer called back. Now, that was great that he had someone reaching back out to him, but his first thought was, oh my gosh, old guys don't survive this disease. So we know that is not true, and glad to see that David and Jack are both still thriving today as supporters of our organization. So Bladder Cancer Canada is a national organization. We stretch across 6 time zones here in Canada. So sometimes it can be challenging to connect and stay engaged with our patient community. But proudly, we have representation across this great land of ours, all corners and all provinces represented to some degree. And I think that has been critically important for our success, so that we're not, centered in one part of the country. We actually reach Canada, and we're also communicating in both of our official languages, French and English. Our mandate, first of all, our vision is to create a world where bladder cancer is just a memory, a noble vision, but one that I know everyone would share on this call. Our mandate is to support patients first and foremost and their caregivers, to raise awareness about bladder cancer publicly, and third, to fund research. And this year has been a challenging year through COVID-19, but I'm proud to say that our team was virtual to begin with, like so many of you. And so that shift from office to virtual to home base was not as difficult for our team. Now, little ones running around at home and spouses at home is a different matter indeed. But certainly our team was agile and quick to respond to the challenges of COVID. So I'm going to stop there, Lydia. That's about 2 minutes introduction, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Ferg. I'd now like to pass the floor to Dr. Ashish Kamath for his thoughts.
Thank you so much, Lydia, and welcome everybody. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be part of this panel. I've been, of course, involved in taking care of bladder cancer patients now going on 2 decades. And a lot of my research efforts are focused on improving the care of our bladder cancer patients, both by adopting existing treatments and also harnessing organ sparing and other new modalities that really focus on improving quality of life for our patients. I mean, it's not just enough to take care of the actual cancer, but we always have to remember to focus on our patients and what's going on with them and their family and the quality of life. Over the years, I've also been fortunate enough to be involved with bladder cancer advocacy groups in the US, the Beacon. Ever since its inception, I've helped with the Scientific Advisory Board and other such endeavors. And I do have the distinction or pleasure of actually having grown up in India and then moved to the US and having friends scattered all over the globe. So I have been very involved and seen in some places the lack of such organized patient support groups in many different parts of the world. So this is really a cause that's near and dear to me. And all the points that have been raised so far are right on the money. I mean, it's very important that an organization such as this comes together, which it has, of course. And the next steps are raising awareness, being available for not only the scientific community, but especially patients and support groups in different parts of the world, raising awareness and then having appropriate benchmarks that we can guide and implement in the different chapters per se. So thank you again for having me this morning.
Thank you, and thank you for getting up so early in the morning to speak with us. Next is Dr. Rachel Giles. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. This is, I'm from Amsterdam right now. It's a beautiful sunny day here, so no tropical storms. And I'm here to represent the International Kidney Cancer Coalition. We are a large global network of kidney cancer organizations throughout the world. We have 36 affiliates among those in I think about 37 countries. And collectively, we represent 1.3 million kidney cancer patients on 7 continents. So we've been around since a dinner that was set up in Frankfurt in 2008. I was running a national organization here in the Netherlands and was invited to join this dinner as a patient organization advocate. And together with about 6 other patient advocates in kidney cancer from all over the world, we sort of founded informally the International Kidney Cancer Coalition back in 2008. And I've been the chairperson since the beginning of this endeavor. So I've pretty much had they were starting to call me El Presidente. It's time for me to step down pretty soon, I'm afraid. But it's been a great ride and an incredible learning lesson. We've had a number of activities we've successfully been able to instigate, including World Kidney Cancer Day, among others, and we've expanded our network significantly We have a very good relationship with our clinical buddies there, and we participate in trial designs now, and we've matured to an extent, I think, as a group that we are beginning to be seen as major players in the kidney cancer policy world. And we're beginning to develop further skills in that area, which is something that's rather new to us. But we are firm believers in the evidence-based advocacy. So where there is no evidence, we stimulate people to do it. So we will organize a group of doctors to figure out what the best approach is to a certain rare type of kidney cancer, for example, where there is no evidence to support a given approach. We also fund meta-analyses and work that we participate in from the very beginning. We sit on the guidelines panels of 4 major continents, and we're very active in the field of discovering where their evidence is lacking to guide our decisions around our priorities. And that's what we've been doing for a while. And I'm here because we've been interested in our upstream neighbor, the bladder, for a long time. Or downstream, sorry, it's downstream. And so we have a lot of things in common. I've known the major players in this team for quite some time. I'm impressed with the work that's been done and the approach and the rapid and efficient way that you guys have organized this. And we look on, in wonder at what you guys have achieved in that short time. So congratulations for being here and being able to hold a meeting of this level.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giles. Yes, it's really been a pleasure working with you, and you're definitely an inspiration. I'd like to pass the floor now to Jofia to speak from her perspective.
Hi, everyone. I don't dare to say good morning or good evening or good afternoon. We are so global here. So before I introduce myself, I just wanted to say how very impressed I was with the presentations and what Ken, Lydia, and Alex have done in the last few months in a very short period of time. And thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for having me here today and be part of this conversation. It's really inspiring and very exciting to see, the work that you are doing here. So I'm Zsófia Bakonyi, and I work for the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. So we are essentially representing the innovative pharmaceutical industry in Europe. So I have a very European perspective. I work in the communications team, but I'm specifically responsible for patient engagement and partnerships. FPA now has a patient engagement strategy in place, which I'm trying to implement. And really part of this is driving the thinking around patient engagement, how we as an industry can better work with patient organizations so that the engagement is more meaningful and it's better outcome for patients. And basically, I'm also managing FPS Patient Think Tank, which is a regular forum for conversation between patient organizations, umbrella organizations, usually European or global, and company representatives that are working in patient relations. So this group has been doing a lot, and I have to say that I'd like to say thank you again to Lydia and Alex for being part of this group and for being so active and so dedicated, because it's really helpful to have a strong patient voice that can really drive and inspire the co-creation around what we do when it comes to advancing the field of patient engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juhi. And before we launch into the panel discussion, I would like to launch a question and answer for you at home. So do you have a bladder cancer patient organization or an organization supporting people affected by bladder cancer in your country? So if you please go to polev.com/WBCPC on your iPhone or laptop or tablet and answer, then we can get an idea of what our audience is feeling and is experiencing. And we have nearly 70 participants joining us live. So no matter where you are in the world, thank you for joining. So yes, please use the link above to answer the question. And so we can see here that currently the people who have responded, we have 90% of people who do have a bladder cancer patient organization. in their country and around 7% who do not. So it's fantastic to see that we do have many countries with bladder cancer patient organizations, but we do not see it in all. And I imagine as well, there are many people who are not able to join this webinar who are also experiencing the difficulties of not having a bladder cancer patient organization in their country. So there is still a great deal of work to do, which is what this discussion is about. So my first question is for Ferg. Canada spans 6 time zones, as you mentioned. How do you possibly achieve effective communications with your potential 80,000 patients in your population base?
So I think critical to our success is the foundational piece of our website. So, you know, a lot of people today would say social media is so critical, and I don't disagree. I'm a communication strategist, but I think having your own asset in a website is really what is critical, because you own that. You decide how you will communicate with your audience. We have discussion forums that are part of our website. We have all of our resource material, our patient guidebooks, our email first touch point with our patient base. So to me, fundamental to the success of an organization is that web asset. Then from there, you can decide how you're going to engage and connect with that community. And some folks will be on Twitter, some on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. YouTube is another platform that we use to communicate a lot of our webinars and information. So I think beyond the website, the fundamental foundation of a website, then you can decide where and what channels you'll engage.
Thank you so much, Ferg. For Dr. Kamat, how do we best engage with healthcare professionals, both internationally and nationally, around the value of patient organizations and build partnerships on that basis?
So the key word there is value, and I completely agree with what Ferg said about having your own asset, which is a website, because it's not just an asset that you can actually control the content on, but the reliability, and to make sure that what's on there is validated, that it's trustworthy for patients, of course, but also healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, mid-levels, everyone, because we see too many of these so-called patient support groups pop up on social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, etc., where clearly the intent is not honest, to be honest with you. It's not pure. It's not a patient support group. There's some ulterior motive. So having an asset that you control, as was mentioned, is very important. And when you have that kind of asset, then reaching out to the healthcare providers and showing them the value of that asset as far as us helping our patients, that's key. Because, you know, like it or not, in many fledgling sort of practices where people are just inundated with care, taking care of patients, paperwork, et cetera, if the flow doesn't help us take care of our patients, it's hard for the healthcare provider to implement this into our day-to-day workflow. I mean, I'm privileged to work at a major cancer hospital. It's been #1 in the US and in the world for the last 13 years. So for us, it's easy. If there's something that's valuable for the patient, it happens. But I know many of my colleagues struggle in different parts of the US, North America, and especially in other parts of the world. And if they then have to sit and say, well, how is this helping me help my patient? And the answer is, well, I don't know, or it's not clear, or no, it's not helping me because it's taking away more hours from my day that I could be providing clinical care. It just doesn't get done. So I think really emphasizing the value and the ease to which you can use this tool or the tools to help our patients is critical.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamat. And for all of you at home, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please use the question and answer box down below. The next question is for Dr. Giles. When it comes to increasing diversity in clinical trials, how can, as an international network of patient organizations, help with that? And has the International Kidney Cancer Coalition undertaken any work in this area?
Thank you for that question. So yeah, one of the things that we come across with as a global organization is that indeed clinical trials are so essential in generating new data, but they are often aimed for a certain socioeconomic and racial subset of people, usually in North America or Europe. They're largely based on Caucasian individuals. However, we know for a fact that the majority of our patients are outside of those areas. And we know that there's got to be more data about racial diversity, among other things, responses to certain drugs, and how can we work with the trial centers to really try and make a program. So we've reached out to some of these centers with questions about how this might be, what are the problems in recruiting people. And we've set up a social media. We have a large number of followers in our Twitter account. We have set up a social media campaign about just trying to include any kind of trial enrollment. It's just called Think Treatment, Think Trials is our effort. And every patient should be asking about the possibility of trials, and every doctor should be asking whether the patient would be interested in pursuing that option. So we're just trying to raise the awareness that trials are open, and everyone should be open to them, and talk to your doctor about whether you're qualified for this, and if there is some sort of variation in what kind of person they're recruiting, push back, ask questions, keep asking questions, and we're there to support people with that. We don't have any measurable outcome for this particular thing. We can't say what our effect is in this, but it is something that we talk to our medical advisory board about. How can we ensure that this is as small a bias as possible, and that the outcomes of the results of these important trials are actually important information that would be usable for people of different and various ethnicities and backgrounds. So it's a hard question to answer. We have made some baby steps in that direction, but we do think it's an important impact that we could make, and opening people's minds to including everyone, and also not just of ethnicity. It's also of different peoples with different stages of disease or with brain metastases, which are often excluded from these trials. This is the real world data that we need to have, and that will be applicable to our larger affiliates, in India, in China, in Japan, because they don't have the same populations.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And we have a question from Susanna. How do we make sure that we get more clinical trials in less developed countries? For example, we see a lot of clinical trials in Western Europe, but fewer in Central and Eastern Europe. So I open this up to the panel in general, or perhaps Dr. Giles, would you like to address this first?
I'll just say a few words about that. It's hard because getting a clinical trial accepted through a medical ethical committee is not a trivial task. So oftentimes, at least in Europe and Central Europe, it might be easier to bring the patient to the trial center. It's a difficult situation, but I think that would be a good step. And there are also more centralized ways in Europe, anyway, I can speak for, in getting people to the trials instead of the other way around. And the States, I guess, in Canada are larger. They have different systems as well.
Yeah, if I could add to that, it's absolutely critical to identify centers of excellence in different parts of the world. In North America, we are fortunate to have these centers of excellence, and access, while challenging, is not impossible in the US and in Canada and in Europe. But in many other parts, South America, in Africa, India, China, and even Japan, some parts of Japan, to be honest with you, it's access that's critical, and access to centers of excellence. So identifying centers of excellence, which we have done through, for example, the International Bladder Cancer Group and other groups such as this, and then vetting those centers of excellence. I've had the fortune of training people who come and spend time with me and then go back, and I hold webinars, and I, of course, prior to COVID, would travel and actually take part in these educational events in these various places, because the quality of clinical trials is so dependent on the quality of the investigators and the center where the clinical trials are being performed. And that's why in the past, clinical trials have not really been able to be done in many parts of the world, because unfortunately the data that then comes out of those clinical trials is suspect in many ways. So quality control, and quality control, it is not necessarily imposing our quality standards on other parts of the world, but just making sure that the quality at that particular center in that particular part of the world is as best as can be administered for that region of the world, per se.
Thank you, Dr. Kamat. Yes, that's a very valuable point. The next question is for Jofia. How can we move from short-term transactional interactions towards long-term strategic relationships with the industry?
Thank you, Lydia. So I think the key word here is partnership. So we need to be partners, and we need to work towards a common goal. And I think that it's really important to have a set of common values and to understand how we work together, and everybody to be completely transparent about the relationship. So I think it's very important that we have a set of common values. And for example, the Patient Think Tank has co-created a white paper that is really outlining the rationale for engagement. Why is it so important for the pharmaceutical industry to engage with patient organizations, but also for patient organizations to be engaged across the life cycle of a medicine, and really be engaged from research priority setting throughout determining the value of an innovation to gathering outcomes data and understanding the value of a treatment in a real world setting. So I think it's extremely important to have a set of common values, and that's really about the clarity of purpose, respect, transparency. And beyond that, I think it's also important to have the capacities and capabilities on both sides to engage. So both patient organizations and industry has to have this kind of knowledge. And when it comes to this, I think we talk a lot about capacity and training for patient organizations, which we do very rightly so, because the more informed and professional patient organization representatives we have, it's really the better for the conversation. But I think it's also important to emphasize that colleagues in the industry, colleagues in the companies, and companies are very big entities. Not everybody is so close to the topic of patient engagement itself. So across the company, there has to be a cultural change where everybody understands how important it is to have the patient view and to engage with patient organizations in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Jofi. And perhaps, Ferg, you can give some examples about how Bladder Cancer Canada has engaged with research and development in a meaningful way to make sure that patients are more involved in the development of new treatments.
Well, I think critical to our foundation was a medical advisory and research board that we have at Bladder Cancer Canada. David and Jack in the early days worked very closely with our medical community. And I think that, as the doctor was saying, that kind of validation for a patient organization is really critical. Our third mandate, as you know, is funding research. We have partnered with the Canadian Urological Association on a number of shared partnerships in the past few years. The last 2 years, Bladder Cancer Canada has had two $50,000 grants that we have utilized, which have been really great seed money. I mean, that $50,000 grant in a couple of situations has turned into other funding because those researchers were able to do some foundational research. And so that was great seed money. And so we partner with the medical advisory and research boards across the country, and we're in constant contact with them. Even, we may get an inquiry from a patient, and if we don't have that as a standard operating response, a standard message, we will make sure that we check in with our medical advisors to ensure that what we're giving them is solid advice. And I think that's critical for any patient organization, is that you do have a strong alignment with your medical advisory and research boards and medical community.
Thank you so much, Ferg. Dr. Kamat, what has been your experience working with patient organizations as a health professional, and how do you see that collaboration between patient advocates and health professionals?
So let me address that second part first. I think the collaboration is absolutely critical. You know, it's not just a one way or a back and forth. It's actually much more intricate than that, because it really is, as I mentioned earlier, the patient organizations help us actually improve outcomes and survival for patients with cancers, and especially bladder cancer. It's not just treating the disease or the snapshot treatment of whether it's non-muscle invasive or metastatic setting. It's the whole support group that goes into it when it comes to the pre, the during, the post, the treatments, but also spreading of knowledge amongst family members, because there's some of cancers that, you know, you clearly need the whole family group to be aware of lifestyle changes for the patient, but also for them themselves to go and get diagnosed and treated and looked at for certain genetic mutations that are, you know, coming up to the forefront as being important. And then going back to the first part of your question, for me, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with bladder cancer advocacy groups from the very get-go. I mean, back in the early 90s, I don't know if any of you remember, there was a bladder web cafe that was run by Wendy from our houseboat in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And that was the only thing that was available for bladder cancer patients. And she was blogging herself, and it was emails that she would respond to in patients. Then, of course, Beacon, which was founded by Diane Qualley and her husband, and is now part of course, the World Organization. I was fortunate to be involved with that group. And then we have our own regional groups within our medical organizations, at our hospital, internationally. And the one thing I've seen common amongst all the groups that have succeeded is that it's a genuine desire to help. And when that genuine desire to help exists at the core of everything that comes together, then putting the pieces together actually makes a lot of sense. And by making sense, I mean everything comes together as a whole. So partnering with pharmaceutical companies is critical. It's also important to partner with regulatory bodies such as the FDA, because you can then help through these advocacy groups to actually improve the regulatory outcomes, to actually look at the endpoints and clinical trials that matter to the patient. So in any advisory panel that I put together, whether it's you know, to advise the FDA or for a clinical trial or even within our own hospital, I always will have a patient advocate on the group, and it's usually a survivor, but sometimes it's, you know, a family member of a survivor on the group, because it's important for us to recognize those perspectives. So it's been really enjoyable for me to work with the different organizations, starting out from an organization with a N of 1 to large organizations such as these. And it's been very gratifying to see how a little bit of investment of time on our part, coupled together with the collective strength of everybody interested in a common goal, really then mushrooms into a wonderful entity that then has a life of its own.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamat. We also have a question from Richard, who asks about the availability of trials in Australia. The World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition has 2 fantastic member organizations based in Australia, both of which are very in tune with what bladder cancer clinical trials are happening in Australia. So we will put information about those 2 members that we have down below. So Richard, you'll be able to access that information. And then we also have a question here, which will probably be the last question for Dr. Kamat, from Susanna, that says, do you have experience of co-creating a protocol with patient organizations?
Yes, absolutely. I presume this refers to creating a protocol for clinical trial design. And if it is that, and then I'll answer another possibility that the question could be. But for clinical trials, absolutely. It's absolutely critical. And pretty much every clinical trial that has been designed by cooperative groups in the recent months and years, there has been input from patient advocates and patient organizations. So it's not just the patient advocate, but also the collective wisdom that you all bring to the table that really helps us be better informed as to what are the outcomes that actually matter. What are the quality of life tools that we should incorporate in the clinical studies? It's a relatively recent development, believe it or not, to include quality of life as an outcome that's measured. It's not always, we can't always make that a primary outcome, because, you know, for some disease states, clearly dead or alive is the outcome that's most relevant, but quality of life is so important. And if you don't measure it in a quantifiable manner that matters to the patient, then sometimes, the difference between 2 months and 3 months survival versus a huge improvement in quality of life versus none is something that gets lost in the scientific shuttle, so to speak, because we can't put a face to the actual disease or the problem. Now, if you're asking about protocols that come into place as far as implementing protocols for patient care in different parts of the world, again, that's something that I've found is not readily accepted by many communities. And I think it's simply because of a lack of awareness as to the benefits that a patient organization can bring to the actual clinical practice in many parts of the world. Because anytime I've had the pleasure of actually showing groups in some places what a patient advocacy group can actually bring to the table and how it can actually help take care of clinical practice. It's referring someone to a website. I mean, something quite as simple as being able to send patients to a page on a smartphone where they can go and download a schedule of when they need to go for the next BCG appointment, for example. Things like that might seem relatively minor are huge pluses for busy practices in many parts of the world. And I think that has absolutely helped implement these clinical care protocols as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamat, and to all of our panelists. I think that we have started to explore the many benefits that bladder cancer patient organizations can have to other organizations and to stakeholders, and to improve the care of bladder cancer worldwide. So now our mission is to make sure that we have an effective bladder cancer patient organization in every single country. And we've been working together with many key stakeholders to develop a toolkit for this, a startup guide. So now we have an animation video to present to you what we have created in terms of a startup guide for bladder cancer patient organizations.
I think that patient advocacy groups provide a natural synergy when working with healthcare professionals, where the impact is greater than the sum of the individual components. Everything we do as healthcare professionals is driven by desire to improve patient outcome, whether it be in direct patient care or in research. And we need our patient advocacy partners to focus our own efforts to align with patient needs.
So many countries around the world, there is no patient group dedicated to bladder cancer. It is our vision to have an active and effective bladder cancer patient group present in every single nation. This is why the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition developed the Startup Guide. We have considered our own experiences in starting bladder cancer groups and have combined our knowledge, tips, and tricks for anyone with ambitions to start a bladder cancer patient group in their country.
Bladder cancer is among the most common cancers in the world, yet treatment, research, and support varies widely across the globe. It is critical that the bladder cancer organizations mobilize to ensure better treatment outcomes for bladder cancer patients. Groups large and small have a role to play in driving change in their communities, and the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition is here to help grow, connect, and support these groups with their journeys.
Join us in our mission and help us reach those who can help improve the lives of people affected by bladder cancer.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists for a really fantastic discussion. And I hope that this is just the starting off point for us working together to make sure that we have effective bladder cancer patient groups in every single in every single country. So thank you. We now have a 5-minute break. So please get up, stretch, get some exercise, get some of those steps in, make yourself a cup of tea or a coffee, and we will be back here in 5 minutes. So you'll see a little countdown screen on your, yes, you'll see a countdown timer on your screen. And again, thank you so much to all the panelists from around the world. It was a really amazing discussion. Thank you. Welcome back to panel 2, which is on ensuring optimal treatment options for bladder cancer worldwide. I'd also encourage you to keep the discussion going, either using the hashtag here on Twitter, WBCPC2020, hashtag bladder cancer aware, or any of the questions in the Q&A below. So I would like to introduce our two panelists that we have now. We have Dr. Stephanie Chisholm, who is the Director of Education and Research at Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network in the USA. And we also have Henry Scowcroft from the UK, who is the consumer member from the National Cancer Research Institute Consumer Bladder and Renal Group. We'll first have a presentation from Dr. Chisholm, one question from me. We'll then have a presentation or a discussion from Henry Scowcroft, one question from me. We'll then have a poll for the audience, and then we'll launch into an interactive question and answer session. So Dr. Chisholm, the floor is yours.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Great. It's a pleasure. I'm so excited to be here. I was there at the launch of the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition, and that was such an exciting moment. And I really do appreciate the chance to speak to everyone today. I wanted to go back a little bit in history, so if we can just get the next slide, and just sort of showcase what's been happening over the last century. You know, back in the very turn of the 19th century there, the cystoscope was developed, and anybody who's ever had bladder cancer or their loved one knows what a cystoscope is, and knows how significant a visit to the doctor to use a cystoscope is for patients. And I'd like to say it's been just a wonderful thing to see that there are new and better ways to do some things. If you think about what early cystoscopes look like to what they look like today, there's a vast improvement in the last 100 years. The other thing I thought was very significant at the turn of the century was that the American Urological Association was founded in 1902. And, you know, most bladder cancer has been treated by urologists throughout history. And I think that it's really important to recognize that as we move through the 19th century, we've begun to be a little more interdisciplinary in the way that bladder cancer is treated. As you see, you know, little significant things that have happened in the past century. For one thing, you know, a global issue is the connection to schistosomiasis, which is a weird little parasite that is definitely linked to bladder cancer globally. And I think that that's something to be aware of. And that was recognized as being linked to urinary bladder cancer back in 1911. In the 70s and the 60s, 1965, they made a definite link between smoking and bladder cancer, and smoking and a lot of other health risks. But the Surgeon General's report came out back then, and so really looking at smoking as a leading risk factor for bladder cancer has been known for quite some time. And we know that even today, about 50% of all bladder cancers are somehow linked to smoke exposure, tobacco exposure. They started BCG back in the late 70s, and it has been the gold standard of treatment for non-muscle invasive disease. Then they began to really integrate more of this interdisciplinary care where chemotherapy became more involved in the process as you moved into some of the advanced stages. And I think some of the milestones in the last century really helped cue up the collaboration that formed the World Bladder Cancer Coalition. And I think it's a very exciting time. If I could just get to the next slide, I wanted to just say that, you know, the 2000 and beyond has been very, very exciting. We're off to a really great start, except for maybe this year when you think about everything that's happening with the pandemic. But there's been so many significant advances in the last 20 years in the bladder cancer space. You know, in 2000, they really did some big improvements. They found better ways of doing scanning to really help in the detection and really an analysis of bladder cancer. And in 2005, the Cancer Genome Atlas established the real importance of cancer genomics. And I think that's been a very significant change in the way that we're looking not just at group of cells that are in a body that you can remove, but really understanding what's happening inside those cells. And at the same time, in 2005, that's when Beacon began, when Diana and John Qualley realized that there was so little attention and funding spent and focused on research into what was a very common disease that nobody ever talked about. And so that really began one of the first big organizations that was really a collective group of people working very closely with the medical experts. And in 2016, the immunotherapy was approved, the very first immunotherapy. We've now had 5 immunotherapies, some that target PD-L1 mutations, some that don't. Some are used only after a patient does not respond to traditional gold standard therapies like chemotherapy, and others can be used almost as a first line, which is very exciting. None of these advances would have happened without what Dr. Kamat was talking about with clinical trials. And I think it's very important to really think about that aspect of things without having this collaboration of professionals, both the clinicians and the researchers, working together on behalf of and with the patients, alongside of the patients. I think none of these big, amazing things would happen. We are real excited. In the last couple of years, there have not only been the immunotherapies coming in, but some targeted therapies, some combinations now using some of the targeted therapies and the immunotherapies and or even some other things like chemotherapy. Bladder preservation using trimodality with bladder surgery to remove the tumor, and then chemotherapy and radiation have all been very effective for many patients, and things that we need to really pay attention to as we're moving forward. So there's a lot of real excitement in the air, and I think that that's something to look forward to as we build this coalition further and further. So if I can get the next slide. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the issues, because the issues haven't gone away, and the issues, I think, in some cases are only exacerbated by the advances that we've seen, because new research takes money. Labs are very expensive to run. It takes a lot of money to test and prove a concept and get it through and make sure it's going to really be effective and it's not going to cause more harm than good. And so bladder cancer research funding is really critical. I'm real excited to say that in the United States, bladder cancer has finally been put on the list of federally funded, congressionally mandated Department of Defense research grants, which is very exciting. We've been working very hard to get that on that agenda so we can get a piece of that money that's in there. And it's really gratifying to see that at this point now, they're even asking for patient voices to be part of the planning on some of the behavioral health initiatives that they're working on. With what we found out when the first bladder cancer paper was published from the TCGA back in 2014, it really opened up a new world for the clinicians that are treating bladder cancer patients. They have to understand a lot more about genomics than they might ever have had to know before. And so that's very exciting, but at the same time, it's not available everywhere. It's not available to all patients. There's a lot of disparities that go on within all of these different areas. Even the urinary tract presents some issues and challenges, because at different areas of the urinary tract, you have different limitations in terms of where things can be treated and how things can be treated. And it's exciting to see that there have been some advances in treating upper tract disease, that type of bladder cancer that forms in the renal pelvis and the ureters. And so that's very exciting. With technology, we've had enhanced cystoscopy, which has made a big difference with narrowband imaging and blue light using CystView to really be able to see what's going on. But again, some of the challenges are it's not available everywhere. For instance, blue light cystoscopy is now available in 3 continents, in Europe, North America, and Australia area. And it's not available everywhere, and not every doctor's office can have it because it's very expensive. So that's something else to look into. And then access to clinical trials. Did you know, Lydia, that there are over 1,200 clinical trials specifically looking at bladder cancer around the world that are listed at the CDC when you look at clinicaltrials.gov. So I think that's really significant. But when you understand that only about 3% of the eligible population engage in clinical trials, what that's doing is it's spreading that out very, very thinly. So it's really a challenge to accrue enough patients to see scientific significance in any of the research that's going on. And then don't even get me started on COVID-19 and what that's doing, but many patients have experienced real concern about going into the healthcare system for routine screenings or surveillance that's very, very critical to making sure that the bladder cancer doesn't return. So that's a big deal. They often have to go in by themselves. Their loved ones can't go with them because of medical distancing practices, because nobody wants to get COVID, nobody wants to spread COVID. So that's a big problem. And then kind of wrap it up with the idea of shortages. We have a current shortage of BCG, one of the most common and significant treatments for high-grade non-muscle invasive bladder cancer. And that shortage is ongoing. We've been working with Merck, which is the one manufacturer that is actually producing the Tice strain, which is the kind that's approved here in the United States. And we've been working with the FDA to try to encourage and engage them to get more of the different strains that are out there around the globe approved for use. And they're doing a lot of testing on that, but that is still a challenge. I understand in other parts of the world there are shortages of chemotherapy and some of the other treatments that are common. So that's certainly a problem. And none of this happens without money. It's very expensive. The fact that they have new treatments is really gratifying and very exciting, but not if you can't afford them. So what's the point? We have to do a lot more to help really understand and make these more accessible, both for the healthcare systems to buy the technology, to bring it in so they can treat the patients, and also so that the patients can afford to get them, whether it's their insurance companies or out-of-pocket expenses. These things can be very detrimental to the patient community. So, and I think that's pretty much about it. Anything else? Any questions?
Thank you.
Lydia?
Yes, Dr. Chisholm, we have one question from the audience, from Gus and Hadi Mohammed, who asks about urine tests and any updates in early detection of bladder cancer.
There are a number of different things that are out there, and I think it's very exciting. Even with the COVID-19, there were people that needed to come in for surveillance, and that was a bit of a challenge. And I know that there are some companies that do have some urine biomarker tests, and there were some pilots where they were actually able to ship the kit to somebody's home. They could have the urine, collect the urine themselves, and then send it off. And from a surveillance perspective, when it's got a pretty good rate to predict when you don't have cancer, that's a good thing for people to not have to go in there. So I know that there are a number of different things that are being worked on and few approvals that are coming out. Some of the challenges is getting the insurance companies to understand the benefit of those and the effectiveness of them and getting them to agree to pay for them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chisholm. I'm now going to pass the floor to Henry, who's going to tell us his story with bladder cancer. Thank you so much, Henry.
Thanks, Lydia, and thanks everyone so much for having me here to talk today. It's a real privilege, and I just want to apologise for not having a whizzy background like everyone else, but when I tried doing that, it projected the logo on my face, which I think probably you don't need to see that. But I thought I would tell you a bit today about how I came to be a research advocate for bladder cancer, tell you a bit about my backstory and about what I've learned in 2 to 3 years of doing research advocacy. So I want to start back in the year 2000 when I graduated from university with a degree in biochemistry, which I'd started with a view to becoming a research scientist myself, but realised over the course of the degree that I was absolutely useless at research science. But what I loved doing was talking to my friends about what I'd learnt in lectures and communicating what I knew about science. So that led me to take a master's in science communication in 2001, 2002. And in 2003, I took a junior role back at Cancer Research UK, which is UK's largest funder of cancer research. And my job there was to communicate the science that the charity was funding to the wider public, to people affected by cancer, to policymakers, to the media. And that's where I have been. That's been my day job for nearly 17 years now. And for a large part of that time, cancer was not something that had affected me personally. It was something I was fascinated in from a as a sort of almost sort of nerdy point of view, which seems quite trite now. But it was over those years I've been involved in a number of projects at the charity. Perhaps the most important of which, for me personally, and hopefully for the charity, has been setting up and running the charity's digital news platform. And over sort of about a decade, I managed and edited and wrote for the charity's website on pretty much everything to do with cancer, from basic biological research through to policy and campaigning issues. And over that time developed a very broad and occasionally quite deep understanding of all sorts of issues around cancer. One thing I particularly want to highlight, because it's relevant to the story later on, is the emerging understanding that cancer is a Darwinian disease. It is something that evolves. The idea that cancer is caused by single clump of uniform cells that grows and invades is now an old-fashioned view, and now we know that cancer accumulates mutations. It's preyed on by the immune system. It evolves and adapts throughout treatment. And that was a concept that, to me, when I started learning about that, started speaking to scientists about it, suddenly made the disease make sense to me. And it's something I became incredibly fascinated with, and developed a lot of very close contacts with researchers working on this particular field. Then in 2016, my partner was diagnosed with stage 4 bladder cancer. She presented with sort of classical symptoms. She'd had UTIs throughout her entire life. One day her kidney pain got a bit worse. She ended up having a CT scan and discovered that most of her bladder was a stage 4 invasive, aggressive bladder cancer that had spread to her lymph nodes, which was, as you can imagine, a shock. But also on a personal and professional level, it was the first time cancer had sort of become real in my life. But the particular thing that was shocking, I remember thinking at the time, was I could pretty much at the time recite a sort of top trumps type card of whatever cancer you could pull out. Prostate cancer, you could say, oh, it's PSA testing, it's older men, it's breast cancer, it's a disease of estrogen and it's got good survival rates, and lung cancer, it's smoking and it's treated with aggressive chemotherapy. And bladder cancer, I just suddenly thought, I have no idea what this disease is. After 17 years of writing about this disease, I knew nothing about it, which I just found extraordinary. Zara underwent 6 cycles of chemotherapy, which held the disease at bay for a bit. She then tried to enroll on an immunotherapy trial, which immunotherapy was just starting to become something seen as very promising in bladder cancer. She enrolled on that, which taught me a lot about the process of enrolling on clinical trials and how difficult that is, and difficult that can be particularly when you have advanced cancer. She had 1 cycle of durvalumab immunotherapy, but by that point the disease was far too aggressive and it didn't do much, and she died 9 months after her diagnosis. So, as you can imagine, and as you can tell from my voice, that was pretty awful. But also, as anyone who's lost anyone to cancer, one that looks back on the whole experience and just thinks, why? What happened? Where did that come from? And this is where the story gets sort of quite surreal, in that I was able to, just before Zara was diagnosed, we were able to get a sample of her tumour sent off to the Francis Crick Institute in London, to the team that I knew there, to analyse it using their latest technology to try and work out if it had any common mutations among all the different diverse cells. And it struck me that actually what I really wanted to understand was, I wanted to understand Zara's diagnosis and death in my own terms. So I wanted to understand what that data showed. So I set out on a quest, which I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years, to really try and understand that tumour. It's led to me writing a book about the experience of Zara's diagnosis and death, but also the scientific understanding of her tumour. I gained permission to get access to some of the data, got access to some of the blood and urine samples she left in the biobank in UCL in London. And we've really sort of done a bit of a detective story to try and understand how her cancer evolved. Some of that data has, some of Zara, along with a number of other patients, took part. The samples were used to discover that the immune cells in the urine can be used to reveal much about what's going on in the immune system in the bladder tumor itself. That was a very weird paper to read when it came out. But it also set me on a journey of trying to find out who in the UK was researching bladder cancer, who were the people I needed to talk to interpret this data and find out more about the disease. And I found some wonderful researchers who I've spoken to a great deal and are now working with. I'll come to that in a bit. But the bigger landscape I discovered was that there really isn't much bladder cancer research going on. There's a very fragmented community in the UK. There's a very fragmented community worldwide. And there is quite extraordinary amount unknown about bladder cancer in terms of not just how best to treat it, which is what we all want to see improvements in, but to understand how best to treat it, you really need to understand it. And we don't understand how the urothelium, the lining of the bladder, goes wrong. What are the steps that lead to the development of an early tumour, how that can, in some people, become a non-invasive tumour, in how sometimes it becomes immediately aggressive, and other people. What is the evolutionary pathway that these tumours go through to become aggressive? So this fascination, this desire to understand, also led me to take up a role as a consumer advocate, as it's called, with the National Bladder Cancer Research Group, where I've been heavily engaged in trying to unite the clinical research world and the laboratory research world around some questions, and to try and stimulate a bit more research in this area, because I think everyone involved wants to see progress for patients. But to do that, as Stephanie said earlier, we need funding, we need good hypotheses, we need some really good collaborations, we need platforms, we need networks. And compared to other cancer types, you look around at the breast cancer world, the lung cancer world, and you can see these incredible networks of researchers exchanging ideas. The bladder cancer world is smaller, and it could do with a shot in the arm, and that is in no way to do down the efforts of anyone working on it right now. I think you're all heroes who are working on it, but we can go up a gear, I think. So I just want to talk a little bit now about some of what I've learnt in 2 or 3 years of being a patient advocate, to try and sort of pose some challenges, throw up some questions. The very first thing we looked at, and I was asked to do with my consumer patient advocacy colleagues on the bladder and renal group, was to come up with what the priorities that patients have for research. So we turned to the published literature, and there was a fair amount in there about all the sorts of things you would imagine: improve the early diagnosis, improve the treatments, find ways to improve the quality of life. But we did a relatively small survey with some bladder cancer researchers, so bladder cancer patients and kidney cancer patients, and I just wanted to add an extra question to the survey just to see what came back. And I added the question, as well as improving diagnosis, improving treatment, I added the question to understand the biology of bladder cancer in order to develop new ways to treat and diagnose the disease. And to our surprise, that came out top of all the questions asked. And it struck me that there's possibly an underappreciated desire among us patient advocates to actually see much more laboratory research, much more translational research in particular, in uniting the laboratory and the clinic together to really understand the disease better. So that sort of really fueled my passion in trying to break down the barriers between the laboratory and the clinic, and to try and get some more dialogue going on there between both the laboratory and the clinic and us as advocates, to really try and come up with really strong hypotheses, some strong research projects that can really shed a light on what this disease is. A couple more points and then I'm done. I think a reflection I have on patient advocacy is it's weakest when it's a second step, when the hypotheses are developed by the research world and then brought out to us for comment. A large part of my early involvement in research was, can you have a look at the patient information sheet for this trial and tell me if it's in plain language? And that is incredibly important work, but it doesn't get us anywhere further. Also, as we've seen with COVID, when patient involvement and patient advocacy is seen as this second step, it's a step that gets dropped too easily. So I think my feeling is research advocacy is much more powerful when it's upstream, when it's about being in the room, when the ideas are being generated and helping shape those ideas. I was incredibly affected by a conversation, Lydia was there as well, this nascent group of translational researchers we had, when I think everyone was expecting that the research question we'd come out with would be focused on late stage muscle invasive cancer. But because we had a member of the team who's personally been affected by non-muscle invasive bladder cancer and spoke incredibly eloquently about the challenges of that particular area of disease, we've really shifted the focus to look at high risk non-muscle invasive disease, to understand what it is, what do we mean by high risk, how do we better stratify patients for monitoring, for treatment. It's such a black box at the moment. So that having that member of the team in the room has really helped shape how we plan to work forward. So I think, yeah, just to re-emphasize the fact that I think the area that most interests me and I'm most passionate about, and I in no way want to suggest this is more important than any other field in terms of quality of life, in terms of improving treatment pathways and advocating for better policies. The area that sort of really motivates me is in this idea of using our role and our voices of patients to bring together the academic laboratory world and the world of clinical trials. I think too much of patient involvement is seen as trials, and Zara was involved in research by donating tissue and samples towards research. There's a lack of tissue for researchers, there's a lack of blood samples. I want to make sure that we live in a world where everyone who goes through bladder cancer, their experiences are used to improve things for others. And every point of data is captured to make the world for bladder cancer patients a better place. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing your story. And I hope that we can all work together to make sure that the next generation of bladder cancer patients have a much better outcome than Zara's. And I'm very sorry for your loss. We see this reflected in many different countries around the world. I'd like to bring up a poll now to ask all of the participants, what are the 3 major challenges in your country? Is it lack of available information on causes? Is it lack of available information on symptoms? Is it delays in treatment due to late diagnosis? Lack of available information on treatment options? Lack of access to treatments due to medicine shortages? Lack of access to treatments due to budget constraints? Lack of access to clinical trials? Lack of patient support groups? Lack of research into new treatments? What are the 3 major challenges in your country? If there are any other challenges that we haven't identified here, you can talk about them on Twitter as well, using the hashtags WBCPC2020 or hashtag #BladderCancerAware. So here we see that the main response is delays in treatment due to late diagnosis here, that 22% of people have said that this is one of the major challenges in their country. We also see that lack of information on treatment options is also a major challenge, as well as lack of available information on symptoms and lack of research into new treatments. So these are some of the many challenges here. And to all of the participants, please know that the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition is here to help you in your country to address some of these challenges, really work together to advocate for changes so that we have much better treatment outcomes for the next generation of bladder cancer patients. First, we've had some discussions as well in the question and answers about primary health care and the issues there. And we see as well, this is linked to late diagnosis. So how can we work with GPs, with family doctors, with healthcare practitioners who are working at that primary care level to make sure that we get much faster diagnosis? Dr. Chisholm, do you want to start with that? We can't hear you, Stephanie.
Sorry, I had my phone on mute. I'm sorry. So, you know, for men, going to a urologist is not an unusual thing. For women, when they start to see the signs of bladder cancer, blood in their urine, and they might have urgency and frequency. As we get older, those happen to most women throughout time anyway. And so they'll often go first to their GYN or their GP, their general practitioner, and look at, you know, the lady doctor kind of stuff, and not necessarily know that they should be going to the urologist to make that diagnosis. And I think that that's a big issue. And I know, have been working really hard to try to raise awareness, not just in the patient community so that they know they need to get into the right doctor at the right time and get the right diagnosis, but also to the physicians themselves that, you know, one of the easiest things to do is to write a prescription for antibiotics. We know that that's a global issue across the board anyway. And so many women will tell us, and sometimes some men, that they were given a prescription for antibiotics for a month, 2 months, 3 months before they say, this is not right, I should get checked. And so that's certainly a big issue. And I know we are trying to do more to help raise awareness in those populations. Again, working with other medical organizations, like the AUA is the Professional Medical Association for Urologists, and ASCO is the American Society of Clinical Oncology. It's really, I think, beneficial to go into some of these general practitioners' offices. That, you know, bladder cancer is common. It's not the most common, but it is common, and it is something that should be considered. But most general practitioners or gynecologists don't necessarily have cystoscopes in their office, and that's really the main diagnostic. So I think some of the new and evolving and emerging biomarker tests where perhaps they could just check urine if there's blood in it and there's no sign of an infection, maybe that will help get people to the right doctor to make that diagnosis. We'll see.
Thank you, Dr. Chisholm. And Henry, you talked about the importance of research into bladder cancer. How do we raise the profile of bladder cancer in the eyes of research funders?
I think that's the really tricky question, and I wish I had a simple answer to it. I think one thing I have run into, particularly while writing my book, is actually the disagreements and the subtleties around some of the data that we use to advocate for bladder cancer. I think we've got the ICD classification of invasive cancers, which ranks bladder cancer 10th, but if you include some of the non-muscle invasive earlier stage disease, it rises up to 5th. But then, you know, all the other cancer types, if they included their non-invasive states, the picture would look different. And there's one particular bit of data that I ran into when writing the book that I still haven't found an answer to, which is this statement we use again and again, which is bladder cancer is the most expensive cancer to treat. And I've read a number of papers, old economic analyses, that have tried to put a finer figure on it. I think it's one of the most powerful powerful statistics, and I don't think we back it up well enough. But I think in order to raise bladder cancer up the research agenda, there's a case to be made that I don't think we as a community quite land well, partly because what statistics are we using? Is 10th most common the most powerful way of getting attention? I'm not sure it is. Most expensive cancer to treat might be, but the numbers are a bit fragile. I think if we need to get our story straight in as a community as to how we're engaging with this. I think particularly in a era of stretched healthcare resources due to COVID, the economic argument is a good one to make. To going back to the point made in the previous session about commissioning research to really dig into these kind of stats, I think it would be a really good use of the limited funds we have to really get some really robust data. And then I also recall a conversation I had with Andrew Winterbottom before he died, where he said, God, Henry, what we really need is someone famous to get bladder cancer. And he made no apologies about saying that. And we live in a world of celebrities, and so talking about bladder cancer publicly is difficult. Articulating it through the prism of celebrity, it's an awful thing to say, to wish anything like that on anyone. And you know where I'm coming from on this, but getting our stats and our data as robust as they can be, and having powerful advocates one we have control over, the other one we don't. So yeah, sure, that's a rambling answer to basically say I don't really know, but those are some thoughts.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Dr. Chisholm, for this very enlightening discussion. I think that we've all learned a lot, and I hope that we can really build on these discussions to have greater partnerships in the future. I'd like to thank all of the speakers who have taken the time from their busy schedules to join us for this discussion. We know that bladder cancer patient organizations, large and small, have a role to play in every country. This includes raising awareness, providing patient support and information and advocacy on behalf of those who are affected. The discussions today provided helpful insights and will kickstart further ideas on fostering an international bladder cancer patient community and building our collective capacities. As research into bladder cancer advances, we have a duty to ensure that the patient voice is driving the research agenda and that patient perspective forms an essential part of it. We must tackle shortages where they exist, and we are looking forward to a future with hope and anticipation for innovative bladder cancer treatment options, which may improve the lives of millions. We should remember that innovation is only as good as its ability to reach the patients who need it most. We have learned today that strong patient organizations are essential to drive change and ensure that bladder cancer is on the health and research agenda nationally and globally. I would like to say a special thank you to our organizing team, Katja and Theo, as well as Alex Felichevus, the Executive Director of the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition, as well as to all of you who have joined us from over 25 countries around the world. Thank you to our members and affiliates for their commitment to the vision of the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition and their tireless efforts in their countries to improve the lives of those affected by bladder cancer. We would like to gratefully acknowledge the support of our industry partners who have made this meeting possible. Thank you, everyone, and please continue the conversation on Twitter using the hashtags WBCPC2020 and hashtag #BladderCancerAware, and do not hesitate to reach out to us at any time. Thank you and have a safe day.